there's a book called The Bell Curve, written in 1994, written by psychologist Richard Herrnstein and political scientist Charles Murray. Why was this book so controversial?
The book is about the importance of intelligence in everyday life. Essentially, IQ scores or their equivalent are correlated to all kinds of social problems and social benefits. The controversy was about one chapter in that book, and that is a chapter about the average difference in mean scores between Black Americans and white Americans. And these are the terms that were used in the book at the time and are still used to some extent. And historically, or really for decades, it has been observed that disadvantaged groups score, on average, lower than Caucasians on academic tests of mental ability, and especially on IQ tests. And the difference is about a standard deviation, which is about 15 points, which is a substantial difference.
What do we know about, from that book and the research beyond, about race differences and intelligence?
It's still the most incendiary topic in psychology. Nothing has changed that. Anybody who even discusses it is easily called a racist just for discussing it. We need to consider a genetic influence, whether there's a genetic influence on this group difference. If you want to fix the problem, you have to know what the problem is.
Yep.
Now, let me tell you this. Let's go back to the bell curve, not the bell curve, but the normal distribution.
Yes.
16% of the population on average has an IQ under 85, which means they're very hard. If you have an IQ under 85, it's very hard to find gainful employment at a salary that sustains you at least minimally in modern life.
There's an extensive literature on performance prediction, a lot of it generated by the armed forces, by the way, indicating that IQ is a very good predictor of long-term life success. And so here's the general rule. If your job is simple, which means you do the same thing every day, then IQ predicts how fast you'll learn the job, but not how well you do it. But if your job is complex, which means that the demands change on an ongoing basis, then the best predictor of success is general cognitive ability. So how many people have an IQ of 83 or less? 10%. So what it implies is that in a complex society like ours, and one that's becoming increasingly complex, there isn't anything for 10% of the population to do. All right, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to ignore that? We're going to run away from that? Or are we going to contend with the fact that we need to figure out how it might be possible to find a place for people on the lower end of the general cognitive distribution to take their productive and worthwhile place in society. And that isn't just going to be a matter of dumping money down the hierarchy, because giving people who have nothing to do money isn't helpful. It doesn't work.
The gender differences in IQ look relatively trivial, but there are differences in ethnicity that don't look trivial. IQ is a particularly ugly aspect of science because the IQ literature reveals that which no one would want to be the case, which is that there are profound and virtually irremediable differences in people's cognitive performance, and that those differences have a very solid biological and heritable basis. No one wants to hear that. They don't want to hear that it's biological. They don't want to hear that it's heritable. They don't want to hear it's permanent. They don't want to hear that it's irremediable and that it actually has a practical consequence. And no wonder they don't want to hear it. The best predictor of long-term life success economically is intelligence and trait conscientiousness. They determined after approximately 100 years of study that anyone with an IQ of 83 or less couldn't be trained to do anything that wasn't positively counterproductive. And that should send a shudder of terror through everyone's heart, because an IQ of 83 puts you in the bottom 10% of the population. We've also seen repeated attempts by scientists and let's call them biological engineers, technical engineers, to try to produce exercises that would increase IQ. And basically the data is pretty clear, and it's also dismal. So we have a really profound problem that, again, no one's willing to talk about, and that's that cognitive stratification of society. And of course, that was laid out to some degree in the bell curve back in the 1990s. But see, on the liberal end, everybody wants to believe that everyone's the same and that you can just train anyone to do everything. And then on the conservative end, everyone wants to believe that if you just got off your ass and looked for a job, there'd be a position for you. And unfortunately, that's just simply not the case.